You are listening to the voice of Kurdish American Radio for democracy, peace, and freedom.
During Amnesty International's annual Western Regional Conference, November 2011, VOK Radio was able to sit down with Dr.Elise Auerbach, Amnesty International USA's Iran country specialist. Dr. Auerback reflects on the recent preliminary reports compiled by Mr. Ahmed Shaheed, Special Rapporteur on the Human Rights Situation in Iran, appointed by the Human Rights Council of the United Nations.
Well, we're very pleased that the Special Rapporteur has been appointed. Special Rapporteur for Iran has been appointed by the United Nations Human Rights Council, and Ahmed Shaheed recently wrote a report, a preliminary report on human rights situation in Iran. This is just a preliminary report. There's going to be a second, more comprehensive report that should come out early in 2012, and we're looking forward to that. And Mr. Shaheed has been very busy collecting information and speaking with human rights organizations and the Iranian community outside of Iran. Unfortunately, the Iranian government has refused to cooperate with Mr. Shaheed. This is one of our major concerns, is that Mr. Shaheed has asked for access to Iran, and the Iranian government has denied him access. In fact, they actually, I think, in a very rude way, said that he could come into Iran as a tourist, but not to carry out his research mission. And I think that is a slap in the face to the international community. The international community determined, this is the first time in the short history of the new UN Human Rights Council that they've actually appointed a special rapporteur for a particular country. They felt strongly enough that a special rapporteur for Iran was warranted, and the Iranian government refuses to cooperate with Mr. Shaheed. Now, if they didn't have something to hide, I think they would cooperate with Mr. Shaheed. The reason that they're not cooperating with Mr. Shaheed is because the human rights situation in Iran is so horrendous that they know that if he were actually given the opportunity to go to Iran and carry out his research, he would find out a lot of information that the Iranian government does not want the rest of the world to know.
In response to whether or not the Iranian government will be willing to give Mr. Ahmed Shaheed access to the country, Dr. Auerbach had this to say.
Well, at this point, they have denied him access. I hope that they have a change of heart. I hope they realize that they can't keep on defying the will of the international community. I mean, they have been very hypocritical. On the one hand, they insist that they have a wonderful human rights record. They insist that they're in compliance with human rights treaties that they've signed, but of course they're not. And they have not allowed access to any of the special rapporteurs in years. They have not allowed access to the special rapporteur on torture. They have not allowed access to the special rapporteur on extrajudicial summary and arbitrary executions. We, Amnesty International, has actually asked for access to Iran repeatedly. We've asked to come in to do research missions. We've asked to come in to be trial observers, and they have never allowed us in. Not once in 32 years have they allowed Amnesty International access to Iran. So it's very clear that they're speaking out of both sides of their mouths. On the one hand, they insist that they're in compliance with with international human rights treaties. On the other hand, they refuse oversight. I mean, many other countries that have severe human rights problems have allowed UN special rapporteurs into the country, but not Iran, not in the past several years.
Since Mr. Ahmed Shaheed's report was first published, many international human rights organizations have voiced criticism that the report does not fully outline the depth and breadth of human rights abuses in Iran. Let's listen to Dr. Auerbach's response to these criticisms.
Well, I mean, I think it's important to remember that it is a preliminary report. Obviously, the problem isn't so much the problem really is the extent of Iran's human rights violations. I mean, that's the real problem. The problem is that if anyone were to document all of Iran's human rights violations. It would take an entire library to hold all the volumes of the abominations that the Iranian government has perpetrated against its own population. So, Amnesty International and other organizations, our partner organizations, we all have put out a huge amount of information over the past several years on all sorts of issues, on violations against Kurds, on the death penalty, violations against the rights of women, and of course there's just new information coming all the time. The Iranian government every week they sentence more people to jail, they arrest more people. So many people are on death row. They've been carrying out public executions. It just goes on and on and on. So the problem is it's just not possible to document all of these massive human rights violations in a short report. So any report, if it's going to be a short report and it's going to have page limits, is obviously not going to cover all the violations that occur in Iran. But that's the purpose of all of the human rights organizations, Amnesty International, the organizations that focus on human rights of the Kurdish people, other organizations focus on human rights violations against Baha'is, against women. And so we all contribute, we all put out our reports. I think it's very, very important that we all document these abuses, and that we all, that we all work together, but we each have our own role in the overall goal of trying to urge the Iranian government to improve its human rights situation. And I do think we have to work together and realize that we each have our own purpose, and that again, the bottom line is the real problem is just the Iranian government. They continue to commit these massive human rights violations, and it's just it's impossible to condense all these violations into a short report. If the Iranian government would stop committing all these human rights violations, I would love it if one day, we could only write a half-a-page report on Iran. I hope that day comes soon, but I don't know. It's going to take a lot of work. But yes, at this point it's not possible to write a short, comprehensive report on Iran that would just fill a couple of pages.
Let's hear Dr. Auerbach's response to whether or not organizations or people with information regarding human rights violations in Iran should contact Mr. Ahmed Shaheed in order to help him compile a more complete report due this February 2012.
That people with information approach Mr. Shaheed and provide him with the information that he needs to complete his report. Again, it's very unfortunate that the Iranian government has not provided him access. Fortunately, there are so many organizations that put out wonderful reports that do such great documentation. So it certainly is. Certainly Amnesty and Human Rights Watch and other organizations work without access to the country. We've certainly put out some very credible reports, but nothing really replaces nothing can really replace actually going on the ground and doing a research mission in the country. And that's what we urge. We hope the international community will really press the Iranian government to. There's no reason why why the Iranian government denies him access. All of the reasons that they provide are just subterfuges and smokescreen. They claim that the special rapporteur's appointment was politically motivated, and yet this was something that it wasn't just Western countries like the United States that voted to appoint the special rapporteur. This is the will expressed by the international community that recognizes that Iran's human rights violations are so outrageous, and so they need to cooperate with the international community. Thank you very much.